Hello,
Hey, hi
welcome
Kuldeep.
to InspireXT Connected Intelligence Live. I'm Kuldeep Thakur, I'm your host, and this is episode 8 of our series. And I'm genuinely honored to be joined by my guest, with whom I'll introduce in a little bit. Earlier this year, InspireXT put together 5 boardroom priorities that leaders across industries, um, such as manufacturing, supply chain, food and beverages, pharma, retail, you name it, all of them are actively grappling with. Safeguarding businesses from global disruptions and building resilient supply chains, embedding AI or intelligence in execution, integrating sustainability into core operations, and developing AI powered and AI empowered workforce. And through all of this, they're also required to deliver predictable value to their enterprises. These are not just InspireXT priorities, they are being discussed and acted upon by leaders across various industries. Today's conversation focuses on one of those priorities, specifically integrating sustainability into core operations. And we all know for decades now, sustainability information has been treated as merely a reporting exercise. It often appears in disclosure statements, annual shareholder um, reports, and ultimately regulatory filings where that has been the most appropriate requirement. Very rarely we see organizations treat sustainability as design requirement. And that is now a shift that we are experiencing, largely driven by regulation demanding it. And therefore, today we will focus largely on the packaging aspect and recyclability aspects. Of course, we'll talk about PPWR and DPP and EPR, and we'll try to unpack what these acronyms actually mean for enterprises. Before we get into it, a little bit more about our mission. So, at InspireXT, um, we are committed to building connected supply chains through connecting through 5 domains, such as commerce, supply chain, product, finance, and operations. And our solutions are built keeping all these 5 priorities in mind. Clearly, today's conversation sits in product domain, but it touches almost every domain ultimately, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And this is where our partner Specright comes in. Specright has done something that most technology vendors have ignored for far too long. They've built a purpose-led, category-defining specification data management platform. It does not replace what ERPs do, what PLMs do, what CRM systems and the like do, the MES, etc. It is a lot more foundational than them. Um, it is actually the very starting point those systems depend on. And I'd like to put on record my greatest respect for Specright founder, Mr. Matthew Wright, and his team for having the conviction to build it. It is a category that he's worked hard over the years and converted this into something that every industry that has sustainability product and similar requirements can benefit from. So we'll talk about that. I was actually very fortunate to meet him in New Orleans earlier this year and share a stage and talk about some of our collaborations and the shared vision that we have. We are a partner of Specright, and we are going from strength to strength in this area because we share the values of sustainability together. So today, I'm joined by 2 guests who live, work, and breathe sustainability. It's fair to say. And I'd like to invite them to introduce themselves. And maybe Danielle, I can start with you. You Before we get into any discussion, a little bit about from my side. Clearly, yours is a very fascinating story, and um, I feel you inspire. You can and will inspire a lot more as you have so far. Joining Specright from university to going through multiple roles to now starting EMEA expansion for Specright. Tell us a bit more about what drew you to this work and why sustainability, specifically packaging, became your passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for having me join today. I'm very excited for the discussion. I think, like you mentioned, my story started back at university. I always knew I was interested in kind of the engineering side, and found a packaging kind of degree with a focus on supply chain at one of the top programs for packaging in California. And so I got my background in packaging, which at that time I felt was very niche, and had the opportunity to meet the team from Specright, which back then we were still under 10 employees. And I had the opportunity to work with them during my actual schooling, and kind of get a taste of more of the tech side of the business, even though I had kind of been in this packaging world. And now looking back, I've been here for nearly 8 years, which is kind of crazy to think back on. But really, I've had the opportunity to just see the business grow so much over the years, which has been really, really amazing. My time really started more on like the implementation side of the business, which was just interesting to see the actual like application get to work with our users and our champions at all of these companies who really wanted to drive change around packaging and sustainability in their organizations. And then from there moved a number of times throughout the organization, from influencing more so the product, and some of our partnerships, to now more recently moving out to London, relocating, and starting our office and our team out here.
Great. Well, from the sunny side of the world to a little less sunnier, I think welcome, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you and learning from you, and of course sharing with our audience. And Pravash, welcome to you as well. First time from InspireXT on this. You lead our global practice, and tell us what brought you to this space, and what keeps you motivated. Share a little bit of your story as well.
Sure. Thanks, Kuldeep. First of all, thanks for inviting to join this session. So my story, if I say, I've been in the industry for 22 years now, and always have worked on the customer side of it. Like, how do you improve the overall customer experience? How do you engage with them? At InspireXT, when we started working on these solutions and all, so one thing that helped me hang on to it, or that motivated me, is the customer centric approach, right? Put customer in the center, everything goes around it, or
Mm.
everything revolves around it, be it your sustainability, be it your customer engagement, be it how they are engaging with customers. So what can we do to help customer, that way the customer stays active and we stay connected with the customer. So that pretty much motivated that approach. Then when we put together different solution, when I was working throughout my career and all, going through CRM solution, I've worked on multiple CRM solution. One thing I saw, they pretty much work in silos, and that's why the customer engagement is not done properly, or they are very less clue around what they're doing and how they can make it work. So what we are doing at InspireXT is bringing all of it together. Specright is again like an amazing component that brings all these together, pretty much fills the gap and works as that missing link which was in there between ERP, CRM, and other system and all. That's why that pretty much helps me get going. So again, very excited to be here and talking further on this.
Thank you, Pravash, and thank you both. Let's get started. I have Few questions, of course, but we could have this discussion on number of topics. So I want to just start with you, Danielle. Obviously, when people hear about sustainability, the very first reaction typically is, well, this is a government requirement. This is a regulatory requirement. So let's get that out of the way first and talk about, we hear these terms like PPWR, EPR, and latterly we've heard about digital product passport, recyclability, number of those. Uh, for a leader who is tracking these and has not yet acted on, or um, they're being asked about this, um, you know, where do they, what do they really do? Where do they go and start tracking these, and what do they start today, and what do they delay and defer? Share your perspective about it, because I think there's a fair degree of confusion about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, the regulation space is just moving very quickly these days. So it's understandably a lot to keep up with, let alone know what every acronym stands for. But I think at the end of the day, like it really, what we talk about is it really starts with the data. I think a lot of these, are specific to packaging in the space, that Specright kind of plays in. DPP, right, for example, goes a little bit further with the product information as well. But at the end of the day, a lot of this is just reliant on the data available and the granular data in order to report accurately. I think one thing that's really interesting about some of these regulations as they mature is that in the beginning, some of them will allow for things like estimates, because typically a lot of organizations this is new for. They don't necessarily have all the data, so they are almost overestimating what they owe or what they must comply with in the beginning. And so what we know, right, for businesses is this just leads to higher fees or fines or, areas to kind of keep up with. So I think, the more data that you can have, specifically for packaging around the material composition, around the recyclability, that is all kind of vendor certified is very important. And that's a big component of this is a lot of the, brands and manufacturers that are a lot of, our kind of customers today. They very much rely on their supply chain and specifically their vendors to give them the data they need to be compliant and report. And so making sure, they have strong partnerships and an understanding of what they need from their, partners in the space is very important, and something, that I know changes kind of almost every day.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, I think more so in Europe, the regulation scene is emerging really fast, and rightfully so. Of course, there's a lot of avenues to enhance our supply chains and general, well-being of our consumers as well. So they come from a right place, but by the time they get to implementation, a lot of distortion ends up happening. So I think that's the whole idea of data and estimates and making sure timeliness is understood. And if I continue with you, I think on the same journey, just let's say, I'm tasked, I'm a leader of a company, and I really don't know what it looks like if I don't have it versus I have it. So, um, you know, what does it really look like when you say embedded sustainability through a specification workflow? Talk to about that journey, and how would I experience progress and growth in that area?
Yeah, I think we kind of talk about like a maturity model at Specright when it comes to sustainability. I think the early pieces are really about like having a system in place where you have the ability to capture that data, because one thing about the regulations is that this is not just a report that you submit once and now you've done PPWR.
Yeah.
PPWR, for example, is going to build upon itself over the next 5 years. And different kind of countries kind of have their own reporting structures. as well as their own kind of specific data needs. The same goes for the United States. They just started rolling out EPR, and every single state is acting separately. And so, that just adds kind of complexity for these businesses. So I think having a single source of truth where you're actually collecting the data from your suppliers and holding it there is definitely kind of step one. I think as you kind of have your data, maybe get used to some of the reports and things that you need to kind of create more efficiencies around. I think that's when you then get, the opportunity to kind of move to the next like level of maturity where ideally, you're all kind of versioning in one system, that data is really live. And so anytime you really just need to, pull something for the next country or the next report, it's more about like, just pulling the data that's already live in your system rather than having to kind of go through the full refresh. And I think the, last kind of stage of really being in like an intelligence space for a company is being able to have good data to either use, all of the AI capabilities that are coming out, and that space is moving very fast, as well as kind of baking it in farther to their R&D processes. They really should be like thinking about sustainability proactively and designing, right, with materials and fee structures and compliance on bans like proactively rather than, coming down the line and then realizing that they're not compliant in an area.
Yeah, I think there's some important points you highlighted. Obviously, it's a starting point. There's always a starting point for regulation, but it's going to build on its own journey for next 4 or 5 years. And if you don't have this structural, foundational structures built that can be grown and extended, then of course every time is going to be a nightmare and climb to a mountain rather than just a journey that you embark on. And I'll come back to AI and the specification per se once again, but let me bring in Pravash a little bit about the specification side and the sustainability side. So Pravash, you talked about customer centricity and customer at the heart of everything that we do and what we should do, of course. In theory, that is sometimes said but not really practiced.
Exactly.
When we engage with customers and we work with Specright, of course, and this is now in the context of we are engaging from a sustainability requirement standpoint. Our industry is known for making promises, and then sometimes there is a concern at the end. But how do you establish? How do we make sure that we know that we can actually meet the customer requirement, and what does that assessment look like? How do customers get to touch and feel what they are embarking on?
Sure. No, that's a very good question. We generally do 5-point approach. I'll take a cue from Danielle as well when she was saying it is not just a system that we do it, or it's not just a report. So there are multiple components to that. And when we do such a sustainability implementation for any customer, first thing is understand the 5-point approach. First point is what are the different KPIs they want to measure it against? Like what are the different sustainability KPIs and how do we want to measure it again? Then coming to the data, which is again key, like what is that data they're taking as baseline, what data they're collecting, what they're storing, and how they are shaping it up. Once that is there, we understand what is the different governance rule around it. Okay, different governance rule, compliances, what they are doing, and how to do that. And based on that, we start mapping them onto the solution, because once we know the KPIs, we know the data, we know the governance and compliance, we then map that onto the application or map that onto the Specright solution or any solution that we're implementing, and then we build a solution on that. And like we all discussed, that it's a continuous process. So how do you measure and monitor? So that's where your optimization and monitoring comes into place. So we keep monitoring that application, we keep doing optimization. So these are the 5-point approach, identifying the need of the compliance or need of the governance, and from a sustainability point of view, getting the data right, getting the solution right, putting the right governance in place, and continuously monitoring and optimizing it.
Yeah, that's good. You talked about the kind of mapping and assessment, and more importantly, governance, because you know there's there's a regulatory part of it that is very
Yes.
black and white. This is what you got to do, but you have only kind of one way to address that technically, which is to make fundamental improvements to the business process rather than
Exactly.
just do what we've been doing, which is okay, fine, I'll keep doing what I'm doing, but I'll generate a report through spreadsheet and things like that.
Mhm.
So taking that foundational approach of that I'm going to improve my operations, I'm going to incorporate
Yes.
new steps that ultimately address the regulation, but more importantly make our operations better and
Exactly.
customers experiences better, of course. We obviously there is this every time we have a purpose built vertical SaaS solution discussion, right? Some people just brush it off by saying it's a best of breed, doesn't fit our ecosystem.
Mhm.
But I wonder, Danielle, if the idea of this whole upstream dependency on what specifications actually do, if you can touch on the significant importance that has been left on table but not touched so much so far about and therefore it has become PDF or a spreadsheet or something like that, right on the corners of the larger ERP and PLM system. So, touch on a little bit more about how should people view it in the strategic importance to their business and the future growth.
Yeah, I think that like the power in all of the data, the ERPs and the PLMs and all of these systems are obviously fundamental to a business, right? And we recognize that at Specright, we're not trying to, you know, replace master data. If anything, we're really looking to enrich it. But I think what is strategic about something like Specright, and specifically the specification data management piece of it, is really how it is built and archetyped is really focused on specifications and the granular level of data. So we almost started in the reverse, right, where we were really getting the foundation right around all of the granular information. Like you were saying, that, you know, others are leaving in spreadsheets or in PDFs or in files that are attached to master data. The good part about that, right, is they still have access to it, but it is not, right, it's not reportable, it's not actively kind of monitored or allow for you to kind of create the I guess like proactive measures, especially when it comes to like sustainability, right?
Yeah.
Being able to identify, like, one big, you know, evaluation many companies go through is like evaluating their entire portfolio for things that are, you know, non-compliant. So if those all, you know, live in the granular details and files today, it's very challenging for them to kind of go across, you know,
Yeah.
hundreds, if not thousands, if not, right, tens of
Yeah.
thousands of SKUs and specs across all of these large organizations. So that really kind of creates a gap for them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you know, I've seen up close working in pharma early on in my career, and this is going several years back, that every single detail had to be recorded.
Mm.
And to record that, we would create those specifications upfront. And sometimes plans don't go to plans, or the actuals are always different. So people will just scribble their notes on, and then you know it it sort of became a cultural issue that whoever has a good handwriting, of course, we can capture it. Otherwise, we go back and start asking questions and things like that. And I think that's symbolic, right, of the industry also, that some of this information is not readily available. You have to collect it, and it takes time. And if you don't have the right platform and processes in place, then it just gets embedded in whatever shape and form, and then we find shortcuts. So of course it becomes fun. That's why I think you guys call it, and I agree with that, the foundational, the data foundations are back in fashion, as it were. And I
Yeah.
think they're relevant for the AI and other discussions we will have later on. So um, let's talk a little bit about the EMEA opportunity. Obviously, You have seen up close the product development, the expansion in the US, but you opened the first EMEA office for Specright. I'm sure that has been a good experience so far, and you're enjoying every bit of it. What are European customers asking that is genuinely different from the US market?
Yeah, I think on the topic of sustainability, I think one of the biggest differences is just the maturity around sustainability. So a lot of the sustainability regulations have been around longer here, have been in practice, and I think some of the cultures as well are more kind of inbred with kind of sustainability in mind. And so when we come out here, I think like the level of expectations around sustainability reporting and the maturity is just much higher out here. So that has really kind of improved, the ways that I think we treat sustainability so foundational, because sustainability and packaging, right, to me are synonymous at this point for many of the organizations that we're dealing with. And so I just think the level of maturity, around the topic is higher out here. Not to say that I think, though, the solutions in place are still very similar. I just think the understanding and the need around it is greater.
Understood. I think we call Europe a good regulator for that reason. I think there's a lot of brain power and thinking that has gone on over the years. So um, that makes sense, having dealt with some of our customers here as well. So are you seeing that the relevance of what you've built and what you've brought here, there's more acceptance, there's more curiosity, there's more experimentation, and therefore the adoption could be faster this time around?
Yeah, I think there's feels like just there's more readiness. I think, take 8 years back when I started at Specright, I think we were very much having to define the category of specification management and educate a lot on the importance of having that data. I think sustainability has been like a big boost to that whole discussion, right? The more kind of foundational data you need globally, I think that is true. But because there have been longer standing regulations in EMEA overall, I think the expectation of like having your data, for example, is something that they've been more used to. And so the readiness to almost add technology as a layer and a tool on top of that
Yeah.
is, I think, a quicker kind of, mindset for a lot of people out here. And kind of trying to bake in the more like proactive or like next level of data. As while they're still adapting to like regulations that changing, they have processes in place that are kind of the solution that they've been now doing for 20 years, 10 years, however long, and now they're looking to kind of make improvements on top of that.
Yeah. And Prawas, I'm going to come to you shortly, but just building on that, Danielle, I wonder you could shed some light on the adoption itself, right? This is regulatory compliance. This is the data is at many places. Of course, Europe is mature, but Europe also tends to act in a certain fashion. So Specright as a solution, just touch on how easy or fast it is to prototype, to really show to people what their problems can be converted in what sort of time, and in adoption. So just touch a little bit about that, because people are very familiar with ERPs and long running programs that take forever, whereas this could be very different.
Yeah, I think with right like regulations like PPWR coming up in August, that's only so many months away now. I feel like the countdown continues to get smaller, and so you're right. Like companies are going through transformations with their PLMs or their ERPs that are going to take 2, 3, 4, 10, right, years that are going to be out. And so one of the biggest things that, we focus on is kind of that implementation, again, being purpose built around packaging, around sustainability, around a few verticals. It allows us to have quick implementations with partners like yourself in order to really bring that, quicker kind of time to value in some of these areas like regulatory and other areas that, require that. And are requiring kind of actions to be taken in the next few months or next, years or so coming up. And so we really do try to kind of bake a lot into the product. I think one, facet of Specright that is really strong is all of our quarterly releases. We have a few kind of pillars where we really develop in packaging, AI, PLM, and more. And so because we're so centric around these, we're constantly kind of evolving with what is new out there. So being agile kind of both on the product kind of SaaS platform side of the business, as well as the implementations to really get up and running, in a number of months rather than years, does allow kind of businesses to transform ahead of the regulatory or pressures that they're finding.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I feel that anything that we can convert sooner as a kind of idea first, and then the real product, customers tend to act fast and get better value from it along the way, essentially. And to that, Pravash, if I may ask you, how do you accelerate then? I think that let's just build on the same theme. What sort of accelerators or principles or methodologies that we then deploy to implement, and how do you keep this whole quarterly rhythm going so people are able to make use of the best features? But at the same time, speed sometimes can undermine guardrails and compliance, and things can break as well. So what are those guardrails to make sure that it actually succeeds and delivers value?
Sure. Thanks, Kuldeep. I'll start with the accelerator one. So every accelerator has a very common principle. What is the reusability of it and how you can reuse it in multiple projects, multiple one. So if you see Specright as a solution, it is built into multiple components or modules, starting with their new product development module, followed by packaging, product, regulatory, quality, all these modules. So as we implement that, we start templatizing them. So those templates help us accelerate the overall engagement, because once we engage with a customer, we start aligning their requirement to the template, so that what it does is, once that mapping is done, the templates can be implemented easily and we can then fast track the overall implementation. But like you said, with fast track implementation and all, there has to be a few guardrails and all. So what we do is understanding, like I said in the beginning, what are their KPIs and goals and how they are planning to get the ROI. So we keep those in mind so that we adhere to what customer is looking for from their ROI and goal point of view, not going beyond it, so that there is a extended duration or mismatch in scope alignment and all. So we take those kind of things. So we start preparing like a business requirement document or a BRD kind of thing that pretty much keeps us on track. These are some of the categories, these are some of the guardrails that we need to follow. We can't go beyond it, because we need to get to that first MVP version of it so that you realize the ROI and then build on top of it. Because this is not a one-time implementation, this is like a sustainability journey that you have to work on.
Sure.
And I think, if I'll add, I think that's like one area that we really value, working with you all. I think that, bringing people on board and kind of finding the value around like what they, care about, Pravash, like you said. But, because sustainability, for example, is always evolving, there will kind of be that ongoing managed service piece and kind of continuous engagement to figure out like what is kind of the next change in level of maturity that then they want to go to, right?
Sure.
That's new set of KPIs and areas to grow into.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you both. I think it's important because, product is mature. It does a lot of things, but it's only as good if you can put it to use faster and with right guardrails and right change management for customers. It's not just, and it may look isolated feature, but actually embedded in the entire workflow of the company, and that requires that good consultative approach and a methodology-driven adoption, of course. Where does AI play in that journey then, Danielle? I mean, you're a SaaS company, you're affected like anybody else with this new phenomenon. Maybe not new anymore, but it's changing really, really fast, almost on a daily basis. So tell us a little bit about the AI built in the product, but also how do we use that, leverage that to kind of continue to enhance these time to value and better KPI return, ROI, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very excited on like the path that, AI could take customers. We kind of talk about our evolution of starting in packaging, naturally growing into products, moving into PLM, and now really kind of starting our AI journey over the last, year or so. And I think, for us, it's kind of in a few categories. We have network, which is really kind of focused on the almost like collaboration between like the suppliers and brands, like we talked about before. You really start to see like an ecosystem, right? When a lot of the same vertical and players are all kind of collaborating in the same system. It's because there are so many, requests for data and reliance on the supplier is how do we really make that as easy as possible. Another area is more like insights, and that can look like right now using natural language to really like interface and search and analyze all of that specification data, because now that you have it granularly in a way that you can report, we really have like that baseline of the foundation that allows the AI to pick the correct data and really analyze it deeper for you. And going back to kind of, what makes kind of Specright or spec data management, really the layer of that is we call it our like spec graph. And that's the idea of how everything is, archetyped to one another, the relationships between data, the linkages, which is also what our kind of patent is focused on. And I think when we look through kind of the end of the year, we're very focused on kind of the agents and the workbenches pieces, which is really just like a holistic view of, actions that you can take in the system in support of AI, whether that is things like versioning or things like creating, R&D and doing new formulations and recommendations for businesses. So I think we're very excited on kind of what the next stage of AI will look like.
Yeah, it seems like your team has really taken this on deeply into the product journey much early on, and there's tremendous benefits, of course, of this. But all of this needs to stay consistent, and it seems like all of that is fallen in place. Thanks to your architectural teams and build teams, and of course the market teams, because the field feedback is always crucial as well. We have some time left, and I want to switch gears a little bit about the motivation aspect, the sustainability, generally speaking. And Danielle, you're a great testament to it. You've embodied this, you've led this, you're a champion. But let's look at it from an enterprise leader perspective and say, how do we frame this as to how they act? Is sustainable packaging or sustainability in general a moral obligation or an ethical one, or is it a commercial one? Because oftentimes that's more visible in enterprise, or is it some sort of a combination? I mean, you're best placed to answer or provide us some insights in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a combination, right? Like there's always going to be part kind of driven on the commercial regulation kind of aspect for everyone. I think we've, talked about it before. Like I feel very lucky to love my job and really love the space that we touch. And I feel fortunate to get to make an impact on like the sustainability piece of it. And so I think, morally and ethically, I very much like align just personally to the work that I do and the people that I'm surrounded by and meet with. I think, not only do I get to work with other people at Specright, right, who kind of align to these pieces, but I also get to work every day with brands and customers and champions who are really trying to make very transformational like changes. I think that adopting technology or like having other people adopt technology is a big undertaking, of its own. And so to be able to champion that in organizations to have, better sustainability with some of these, making incredible kind of innovations for their businesses, whether it's different packaging materials or sourcing in different ways. I think it's very just a very cool space to be in, to see all these people and organizations making changes.
Yeah, and this sort of passion of yours comes through really vividly, and I'm very fortunate to be talking to you and partnering with you, and we'll continue to build on that as well. So that, of course, Pravash, also leaves us with an obligation, right? Which is, um, uh, we started our journey with Specright for about 18 months ago, and it's grown to be one of our fastest growing, and it's aligned to our mission and vision very nearly and dearly. Um, I think it's relevant at this time for us to say, but beyond that alignment, which is quite deep, how do we stay qualified, right? What do we? There's tremendous change, incredible amount of innovation that Specright team is delivering day in day out, and we will stay on the top only when we are able to catch up and keep up and be of that value. So how do we what do we do, what does your team sort of undertake every day, and how do we keep aligned with that?
So there are two sides to it. I'll come because you asked the AI part of it. I'll start with the AI, then I'll come to the one. So InspireXT, as we know, we follow a CDM, like a common delivery model. So that pretty much helps us align or standardize each project. There are 5 A's that we follow, starting from adapt to accelerate or growth path and all. So that's where we are trying to get the AI embedded so we can start automating some of those processes. So like Daniel, you mentioned about data, like if the AI can mine the data and understand what exactly it is doing, AI can automate some of the processes, maybe our testing processes, maybe our requirement processes. So AI will be embedded in that. Most people say it's a competition. I consider it as a complementing to our work and all. So that's the first part of it. The second part is like, how do we prep ourselves? So what we are doing is we are doing regular enablement session with the Specright team, understanding what is exactly going into the product. We are connected with the product team, the architecture review board team, so that we understand what architecture is coming in place. The product team guides us around what are the new features that are coming into the product. What do we see in there? Kuldeep, you and I also attended Spec Summit. We saw the Formulate one, and at last that Sachet also. So how that whole thing comes up, how that AI and the product innovation comes together and bring those new components. So we keep ourselves updated. Our team has a bi-weekly cadence with Specright team, where we do all the enablement session, understanding what's new in the product, what's coming in, be it security related, be it product related, be it config related. So that helps us, the AI part of it, to fast track it. The enablement part of it is to be on track and understand what's coming on. So that helps us. Yeah.
Great, great. Well, a partnership, I mean, for us and for me particularly, um, we can read it differently, but for us it is staying together in the journey and learning from one
Yeah.
another. There is a lot of feedback from the ground that we can actually provide back to the development teams to make the product better. And it's we have to combine forces for the long term. It has to have that long termism mindset, and that's why we built that blueprint for success, and that's why our collaboration is working right now, and long may it continue as well. So that's awesome. Um, we are now in the last segment of our time that we have available, so let's make the most of it. there are a couple of things that I want to touch on. I think one is about, for the organizations, and of course, specifically in Europe, as you said, Danielle, there a lot of maturity, a lot of readiness. But there must be organizations that are not ready yet, or there must be organizations that are not thinking about it in a certain way that they need to, given the regulation now. And there surely are organizations that specification is not heard of as a system of record, but more of a documentation system, right? Um, so how do you get them started? Like, where should they go, and how do they also get inspired, because the cost of waiting could be substantial?
Yeah, I think, I like calling these kinds of individuals who are looking for change almost like change makers. Like, I think that not everyone in the organization, right, is like seeking out kind of some of these efficiencies, and almost that can feel siloed, probably similar to a lot of the, the data and systems that they're, facing today. And so I think it's, really kind of like identifying their goals and kind of KPIs around like what their long-term success looks like, right? Like visualize what they do want to change about, the day-to-day or the siloedness of their information, how they would like to be more proactive, right, in their sustainability changes and journey. Like I think these kinds of, are measurable and changes that you could really look to make. I think the starting place is also like understanding like your requirements for a system. I think you're right. A lot of people have not necessarily considered needing like a spec data management platform. They're used to doing it on the static files or uploading it in that capacity. But I think like kind of again visualizing like what data and right like product data and packaging data could look like if it was centralized and accessible by all of the teams is really the starting place. For us, we also typically work with our kind of companies on value cases, like similar to how Pravash is talking about value through the implementation. We do a lot around like value consulting, both during the sales process and during implementation. Because what we're really looking to try to measure are things like the reduction of fees, right, for EPR by having actuals of data, the auditability of data, the completeness of your data. And these are all things, the reduction of costs for SKU proliferation or packaging. These are all things that when you kind of centralize a system, you can start to map out of what you really want that system to have. So I think, envisioning like what success looks like with this kind of change is an important starting kind of place.
Yeah, and on this, that's great. And I think it's a question of awareness, as we're talking about whether I need a spec system, because we're wired in a certain way so far. But to build on that, let's talk a little bit about the industry, some real names from American side of the business, or multinationals that have European divisions or engagements here. Could you touch on that side of the story so it becomes real as to why somebody chose it, and some big names in the industry who are actually already doing it? Can we touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think, one of our kind of bigger relationships over here is Unilever Prestige. And I think they're a great example. Yes, they are obviously a large scale business, but they actually started with just one of their brands. So this was many years back. This team, again, was looking for a system specifically around packaging sustainability, trying to adapt actually, interesting to a lot of the retailers in the US had information that they wanted to collect, and you would actually get like better placement on shelves based off the kinds of like sustainability metrics that you could have. So they underwent this initiative to get packaging, sustainability data. They went on to be able to do a lot of like innovation around their packaging materials and won a lot of awards in the cosmetic space. And then as they kind of grew, they treated Specright now as a global platform across Unilever prestige kind of brands. So now all 8 brands are actually on there, which allow for things like global sourcing, right, or global access to kind of this level of data, instead of now just not only teams, right, within businesses acting like silos. It's like all the businesses kind of coming together.
Yeah.
And they've really kind of looked to mature beyond taking packaging sustainability at 1 brand to packaging sustainability at 8 brands. And now have grew to actually also integrate with other regulatory and raw material information to do like the full kind of product as well. So they're kind of a good story to show like the evolution of where kind of a brand could go, whether that's, a smaller one to a larger.
Yeah. So, and that's very meaningful, very powerful. It's very relevant, globally understood. But generally, for the use cases are for food and beverages and cosmetics and beauty, I suppose, and of course life sciences and pharma as well. But that's kind of the main segment currently going through and this change. And is DPP, touching back on the regulation side, is DPP also driving some more awareness around these kind of requirements?
Yeah, I would say DPP for the industries we serve, it is many years out still. So there is DPP into effect for other areas or maybe sub kind of areas. But I think the concept behind DPP of like sustainable products is well understood, where people are not just focused on packaging, they're focused kind of beyond that. And DPP has other requirements right around codes and kind of labels as well. And so when we think about kind of businesses looking to mature in it, I think some of it is a lot around packaging and the materials, right? I think emissions many years back were kind of where a lot of the goal setting was. And now it's kind of evolving into like the full product as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. And a question to both of you, and maybe I can start with you, Pravash. And this is, you know, a lot of it you talked about, Danielle, that it's not something that is the need is not there right now, or at least not understood to be there, and therefore you need somebody to be kind of change, being the change maker or volunteering or curious enough. So for leaders and for people generally, what's one single mindset shift you would anchor or champion, that they move from reporting sustainability to designing sustainability, and operationalizing it? And let's start from you, Pravash, and then we'll
Sure.
conclude with Daniel.
Sure. I think, like you said, it has to be inbuilt. So I was reading on a very nice article, which is like green by design. So when you start with that thought process, if we can bring that mindset into the leaders, like when you say green by design, it is not just that, okay, you do some reporting and you understand what's going on. So it has to be embedded in your base structure as well. You talked about DPP just now. So what DPP does, not just when it's a digital product passport, it pretty much get into the what do you call the traceability of the spec or traceability of the particular product, so that people are not worried about the packaging, but beyond as well. Where is my product procured from? Where it is coming from? So those are some of the areas that pretty much helps around build those sustainability. If you start capturing that from the very early stages of the product manufacturing and bring it to the final finished good and all, so that's where we will have the true sustainability implemented and monitored across years. So, like I say, again, I'll say the motto should be green by design. So you start very early on your journey, then move on.
And Danielle, your
Yeah,
perspective?
I think just to build on that, I think packaging alone is just starting to make its way kind of into the boardroom with all these like regulations. I think that sometimes these can be, smaller teams within organizations, but these like fees and fines and changes, right, that they're trying to go through can be a big piece of it. So I think just kind of the change management or the collaboration like happening within teams, whether that's packaging and R&D and procurement, is kind of all getting alignment to some of these regulations, because it's really not something packaging can do on their own. And so it's really getting kind of a alignment with everybody.
Oh, great. Well, let's end on that note. It's been fascinating learning about what's going on in this world. Of course, I'd like to thank you both for sparing your respective diaries for today's conversation. It's very important. We'll come back with some more discussions in the future. But if I were to summarize from what I heard, clearly there is a regulatory pressure, right? I mean, that's European side of the story, and rightfully so. But it is much beyond than regulatory. I think it's also a personal passion and a lot of society and environmental consideration. Green by design is a great example. How do we make it part of the design is always a challenge, because if you can put this in the design, it probably gets operationalized somewhere. You can't actually work your way back from a finished product back to or you unpack that. So,
Yeah.
absolutely. And therefore, it's not a question of whether you are required to act. I think that's a given. That's essential. It's a question of how soon can you act and how decidedly can you embark on this journey. And capability like Specright enables you to do just that, right? And you start with a very foundational, often neglected piece of information called specification. It's a double benefit, as I call it. You've now automated something that had not been for a long time, but you also embarked on a fundamental transformation of the business and the processes, and people uh, can align to that purpose very well. So there is lots of benefits, and I can go on, of course, of the commercial benefits of it, but that's for later time. And um, obviously, reach out to Danielle if you're looking for some advice. Their website is very comprehensive. It provides a lot of content, demonstration. Danielle is really championing it. She's active on many forums. And of course, reach out to Pravash and us as well. We'll connect you with the right Specright people as well. So with that, I just want to say how incredibly grateful I am, Danielle, for your insight, and thank you, Pravash, as well, for making the time. We will continue working together, building it together, and hopefully, I'm sure when we come back, we'll have some more success stories to share. So, with that, thank you very much for whoever joined and whoever is going to watch it, and for everyone who is definitely going to look to engage with Specright.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Danielle.